Julia Benton, an ER nurse, heroically saves a bleeding stranger in a hospital parking lot, taking a bullet for him herself, but the hospital claims no other victim was found, despite her clear memory of the man. Isolated and recovering, Julia receives a cryptic note in a mysterious Marine Corps challenge coin. She notices unusual maintenance men and a strange nurse who whispers, "He's alive and he's grateful." Julia realizes she's not just protected, but watched. And the man wasn't merely a victim, he was a target. What classified mission has she stumbled into, and why is she being kept in the dark? If Julia's incredible story of quiet courage inspired you, imagine what other unsung heroes are out there. Don't miss another powerful narrative. Support my channel by subscribing and hitting the notification bell. Let's uncover more inspiring stories that remind us of the best in humanity. Join our community today. The sharp cry, "Watch out, gun!" ripped across the stillness of the hospital parking lot, cutting through the evening air like a blade. Julia Benton, 28 years old, an emergency room nurse just off her shift, turned at the sound. In the blink of an eye, she spotted a man crumpling to the ground, crimson blooming fast across his shirt. Blood, a lot of it. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She just ran. From the corner of her eye, a black SUV roared toward them, tires screaming against the pavement. And then, gunfire. Instincts surged where reason might have failed. Julia did the one thing no one else even considered. She threw herself in front of the man. The shot cracked through the air and tore into her shoulder. Her body slammed against the concrete beside him. She had no idea who he was, but in that split second, it didn't matter. Days passed in a haze of medication and pain. Her body was healing, but something in her had changed. And then, still bandaged and stiff, Julia walked into the hospital lobby. The usual hum of noise and movement seemed to hush all at once. 12 Marines stood there waiting. As she stepped in, one of them moved forward. His voice was steady but filled with something heavier than words. "You saved my life, and far more than that." Whatever followed froze the room in reverent silence. Julia Benton carried silence like a badge, not the kind that hollows out a room, but the kind that speaks louder than sound. She was born into that kind of quiet. Her childhood unfolded on a windswept plot of land in rural Arkansas, near a place called Mountain Home. The roads were unpaved and dry, the neighbors distant, and the nights so deeply silent that even the coyotes announced themselves before they appeared. Her family's house was a small, weathered farmhouse, ringed by tall pine trees that rustled softly with every breeze, every season. The wind there didn't just blow, it whispered. Her father, Roy Benton, had once been a mountain of a man, a Gulf War veteran with broad shoulders and a sense of order carved into his bones. But war leaves marks that metals don't erase. A roadside bomb had left him with a limp and deadened nerves down one side of his body. Still, he never once gave voice to pain. Every morning at 5 sharp, he rose and limped out to his workshop, even if all he could manage was sorting screws into old coffee cans. He lived by a simple creed: work gives a man shape, and values give him purpose. He passed that on to Julia, word by quiet word. Her mother was the warmth in their world, the laughter, the soft hands, the reason birthdays felt like celebrations and not just dates. But she was taken too soon. An illness, sudden and unrelenting, when Julia was only 10. One day there, the next gone. Roy crumbled inward, silent in his grief. Julia, too young to understand the full weight of loss, could only feel the cold echo left behind. After that, the house grew quieter. Softer sounds, harder edges. But what her mother left behind, gentleness, kindness, never vanished completely. It settled into Julia, quietly, like breath filling lungs. Roy didn't raise his daughter to chase bright lights or shiny achievements. He raised her to be the rock in a storm, the one people looked to when things went wrong, the one who didn't blink when the world shifted. His words were few, but they stuck like scripture. Right is still right, even if you're the only one doing it. That one line, said so many times it became stitched into the fabric of her thoughts, guided her through every challenge. In school, where others cut corners or mocked volunteer hours, Julia held firm. Even when it made her an outsider, even when it hurt, she never bent. And when college came, she didn't aim for grandeur. No Ivy Leagues, no dreams of escape. She picked the University of Central Arkansas for a single reason. It had a solid nursing program, and it was close enough for her to be home by Sunday dinners. But nothing about it came easy. Julia took night shifts at a small-town diner, pouring coffee for truckers, wiping down sticky booths, scraping enough money together to survive. After exhausting clinicals, she often got home past midnight, her body aching, only to be up again by 6 for lectures. She skipped meals to save money for gas, wore out her shoes before replacing them. Most classmates never saw that side. They saw her steady presence, her quiet focus. But her professors noticed the grit. Her patients noticed the way her hands didn't just treat wounds, they offered calm. She never needed to speak loudly. She just needed to be there. And Roy saw it all. Every weekend when she came home, they'd sit side by side on the porch, sometimes saying nothing, just watching the sun sink behind the trees. Other times they'd talk about everything, war, the news, life and death, the kind of people this world lacked. You don't need a title to make a difference, he told her once. You just need to show up when it counts. She didn't know then just how much those words would matter. Because one night, an ordinary Tuesday, without warning, she'd be asked to show up in a way few ever are. And when the moment came, she wouldn't flinch, wouldn't hesitate. She would step forward, not because it was safe or easy or even logical, but because it was right. Julia Benton had just finished a grueling 12-hour shift in the emergency room at Saint Vincent Memorial. It had ended in chaos. A multi-car collision on the state highway had sent 3 trauma cases through the ER doors all at once. 2 were in such critical condition they had to be airlifted out immediately. One of them coded twice. Despite being bone-tired, Julia didn't leave. She stayed back, helping a new nurse stabilize the 3rd patient, guiding her through the protocol with the quiet precision born of too many nights like this one. Only when she was confident everything was under control did she turn to the paperwork, pushing through the backlog of charts that had piled up in the flurry. By the time she finally clocked out, the corridors of the hospital were dim, hushed. The overhead fluorescents that usually buzz mercilessly had dulled to a low hum, almost like a whisper. Julia tied her hair back with muscle memory, tugged on her worn denim jacket over the rumpled scrubs, and slung her bag over one shoulder, sore from the weight of the day. Outside, the parking lot shimmered under a thin evening drizzle, the pavement slick and glistening under the tall overhead lamps. They cast soft halos of yellow-white light, reflected in puddles that hadn't yet dried. Her old Honda, a loyal but dented relic from her nursing school days, waited near the far edge of the lot. She was halfway there, already digging for her keys in the bag without thinking, when a sudden sound stopped her cold. A wet thud, heavy and final. She froze. Turning sharply, she spotted a man collapsed near the entrance to the parking garage. He was wearing a tattered military jacket, his body awkwardly twisted on the slick asphalt. Blood bloomed rapidly through the fabric of his shirt, soaking it with alarming speed. It was too dark to see clearly, but her instincts didn't need much light. This wasn't a surface wound. It was internal, serious, dangerous. Even before her brain could catch up to the horror of what she was seeing, her training had already labeled it internal bleeding, massive trauma, time critical. And still no one moved. A young couple nearby glanced over, paused, then turned away, choosing distance over involvement. Another man took out his phone, not to help, but to record. Julia watched the fallen man as he weakly lifted an arm, trying to wave them off. He didn't shout, didn't plead. He seemed determined to stay conscious, his eyes scanning the lot with sharp, frantic precision, focused, alert, not panicked, searching for something. Then she saw it too. A black SUV, headlights slicing through the dim lot, moving too fast, too aggressively. Its windows were tinted, no plates. It wasn't looking for a space, it wasn't even slowing down. It was moving with intention, a predator's pace. Every cell in Julia's body screamed at her to run. She could have sprinted the last 20 yards to her car, thrown herself inside, locked the doors, and watched it all from safety. Or she could have ducked behind the row of hospital supply carts near the wall and stayed out of sight. She had options, but something deeper, older, more instinctual than fear kicked in. She ran, but not away. She ran toward him. "Call 911," she shouted into the air, not even looking back to see who might hear her. Her shoes hit the pavement hard, the echo of her footsteps bouncing through the near-empty lot. The man on the ground was trying, barely, to push himself up, swaying with the effort. Julia reached him just as the SUV screeched to a stop no more than 20 feet away. The driver's window slid down. She saw the sudden flash of the muzzle before she even heard the shot. The gunfire split the air. Without hesitating, Julia threw herself forward, wrapped her arms around the man's upper body, trying to cover him, shield him, protect him. A searing pain ripped through her left shoulder, fire lancing through muscle and bone. It spun her sideways. Her knees buckled. She went down hard, her head cracking against the unforgiving concrete. The world blurred. Lights turned to stars. Sounds became muffled echoes. Pain pulsed like a drumbeat, radiating out from her shoulder. But somewhere in that haze, she caught the look in the man's eyes. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't even in shock. He was stunned, disbelieving. Not just that someone had jumped in front of him, but that anyone had. Seconds later, the SUV roared away, tires screeching as it vanished into the night, gone before anyone could think to stop it. Silence fell again. Julia lay bleeding beside the man she tried to save, her breath ragged, every inhale a battle. Shock closed in fast, cold and suffocating. Darkness pushed in at the edges of her vision. She tried to speak, to keep her mind tethered to the moment, but all she could manage was a whisper, a question that slipped out before she even knew she was speaking. "You safe?" And then the world collapsed. The first thing she felt was weight, a dull, throbbing pressure radiating from deep inside her shoulder. Then came the smells, antiseptic, alcohol, something sterile and clean. The soft beep of a heart monitor ticked nearby. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, mechanical and steady. She was alive. Her eyes fluttered open to a pale ceiling, its details blurred by drugs and sleep. For each second, she couldn't remember why she was here or where here was. Then the memories broke through. All at once, the blood-slick pavement, the sound of a body hitting the ground, headlights cutting the dark, a gun firing. A figure came into view beside her. A nurse dressed in ICU blue leaned over gently. "Julia, you're in the ICU," she said, her voice calm and practiced. "You were shot, but you're stable now." Julia blinked slowly, the words swimming in and out of her comprehension. "What about the man?" The nurse hesitated, then glanced down at the chart in her hand. Her expression shifted. Something unreadable. "You were the only one." That night she had been certain he was right there, bleeding, vulnerable, and fading fast in her arms. Yet now they were telling her no one else had been found. No second victim, no other person taken from the scene. "That can't be," Julia whispered, her voice barely audible, almost pleading. "He was right there. I was trying to protect him." Later that day, Dr. Levenson walked into her hospital room, his expression carefully neutral, unreadable. He stood by the bed with practiced, irony calm. "Julia, the bullet passed clean through. You lost a good amount of blood, but it missed all major arteries. You're lucky," he said. She flinched at the word. "Where is he?" Her voice sharpened. "The man in the parking lot." Dr. Levenson's shoulders tensed. "Security reviewed the surveillance footage," he said slowly. "No one else was injured. No second ambulance arrived. Police believe it was an attempted mugging. You were likely the intended target." "No," Julia's tone hardened, resolute. "I saw him. He was bleeding out in front of me. He wore a military jacket. I wrapped myself around him to shield him." The doctor gave a sympathetic nod but didn't argue. "You need rest," he said gently. "Don't overwhelm yourself right now." But rest wouldn't come, not with his words pounding in her mind like an accusation. You were the only one. The next day crawled by. A few coworkers trickled in with flowers, cards, and hesitant jokes meant to lift the mood. But their attempts at comfort felt like salt in a wound. "I heard it was gang-related," whispered Annie from the ICU, eyes wide with gossip. Nick, the trauma nurse, said with a half-smile, "Word is the guy you tried to save was a dealer or something. You took a bullet for a real lowlife." Julia turned her head toward the window, letting their words drift past her like static. They didn't understand Aiden. She hadn't stopped to question who he was or what he'd done. He had needed help. That was all that mattered. Her father's voice echoed in her head, strong and certain. You don't ask if they deserve help. You ask if they need it. That night, long after visiting hours ended and the hallway lights dimmed, Julia noticed something unusual. A plain white envelope sat on her bedside table. No one had mentioned leaving it. Her name was written neatly on the front, but there was no return address, no hospital logo. Inside, a short note written in tight, deliberate script. No one can know who I am, but I know who you are. You didn't just save me, you saved more than one life. What you did in that parking lot allowed a mission to continue, one that will protect countless others. I owe you everything. LT, 4th Recon Unit, MRF. She read it once, then again, then again. 5 times in total. It wasn't a prank. The tone, the specificity, the mention of a mission, it rang with a truth she couldn't ignore. She remembered the jacket now, clearly, faded but unmistakably military. And she remembered the way he had tried to wave others away, not out of fear or rejection, but to protect them. Over the next 24 hours, small things began to change. 2 men loitered outside her room wearing matching maintenance uniforms. They didn't clean, they didn't speak to staff. Their backs were too straight, their movements too measured. They weren't janitors. She knew military posture when she saw it. When she asked the nurses who they were, they brushed it off. Just extra security, one said vaguely. That night, as she reached for her water, she noticed something else on her bedside table. A coin, old, weathered, with the insignia of the United States Marine Corps etched into the metal. Not some commemorative trinket from a gift shop. This was real, something earned. And suddenly, it all clicked. She hadn't thrown herself in front of a random bystander. She had protected a target, someone significant, someone whose survival had implications far beyond her understanding, and someone, somewhere, didn't want her to know the full extent of it. By morning, Julia Benton was no longer just a recovering trauma victim. She was alert, watching, noticing the changes in her environment with quiet precision. The 2 so-called maintenance men never emptied trash bins or carried tools. They stood in near-perfect stillness, too still. When she tried to make eye contact, one of them immediately looked away, like acknowledging her would breach some silent rule. Julia wasn't being paranoid. She had worked in trauma long enough to know when something didn't add up. She had seen plainclothes security assigned to protect high-profile patients. But this was something else. No one was telling her anything, yet she could feel the invisible boundary drawn around her, the eyes that tracked her every move. Then came the woman. She arrived mid-morning wearing pale blue scrubs, a tray of bandages in her hands. Her face was unfamiliar, which struck Julia immediately. After 3 years at Saint Vincent, she knew nearly every nurse on every floor. The woman said nothing, not a single word. She moved with confidence and clinical accuracy as she changed Julia's dressing. Her touch was steady, practiced, respectful, like someone who had done this hundreds of times before. And just as she turned to leave, decision to act without hesitation, without knowing the full scope of what was unfolding, had changed everything. Julia swallowed hard. The word assassination kept echoing in her mind, a hollow sound stretching into the corners of her thoughts. Colonel Granger continued, his tone steady, shaped by years of command and the burden of secrets. Commander Rohr wasn't just being followed. He was being hunted. We believe they tracked him across borders. The attack in that parking lot? That was their moment to strike, and they nearly succeeded until you stepped in. Julia didn't move. She felt frozen in place, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what she was hearing. Her body still ached from the impact of that night, the shrapnel, the fire, the scream. But now pain gave way to clarity. You shielded him, Granger said, without body armor, without knowing who he was or what was at stake. You acted on instinct, on courage. And in doing so, you preserved something we couldn't afford to lose. He paused. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was reverent. Julia could feel it settling around her like thick fog. She looked down at her hands, one of them still bruised, the other unconsciously clenched in her lap. Granger noticed. "The coin," he said softly. "I assume you found it." She gave a slight nod. "By my bed," she whispered. I didn't know what it meant. He smiled faintly, something between solemn respect and unspoken gratitude. "It's not something we give lightly. That particular coin, it's from the 4th Reconnaissance Battalion, Marine Forces Reserve. I served with them. So did Commander Rohr." Julia looked up, her gaze steady now. "He left it for me." Granger didn't answer right away. He stared ahead, jaw tight. Then, "It's his way of saying thank you, of honoring a bond forged in moments that don't make headlines but shape the world in shadow." She exhaled, a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "No one told me. No one explained. I thought I was going crazy." "You weren't," he said gently. "You were being protected. Watched, yes, but not as a prisoner, as someone whose survival mattered. You intervened in something much larger than you realized. There was no media coverage because there couldn't be. The operation was off books, and exposure could have cost lives, yours included." A silence passed again. The hum of the hospital hallway outside seemed suddenly distant, muted by the enormity of what was now laid bare. "Why me?" she finally asked. "Why was I even there?" Granger didn't answer with words at first. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope, setting it on the tray beside her water cup. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "the universe puts the right person in the wrong place at exactly the right time." She picked up the envelope with trembling fingers. On the front, in small block handwriting, it simply read, "Benton." "I can't tell you everything," Granger said, rising slowly to his feet. "Much of this remains classified. But know this, your instincts, your courage, that wasn't an accident. It changed the outcome of a mission that could have ended in global catastrophe." Julia looked up at him, her heart thudding in her chest. "Will I see him again?" Granger gave a small nod, though whether it meant yes or simply acknowledgement, she couldn't tell. "Maybe, maybe not. But know this, he remembers. He's alive because of you." He picked up his cap, paused one final time, and offered her a sharp, respectful nod. "Semper Fi, Miss Benton." And then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him with the finality of a sealed file. Julia stared at the envelope, the coin still beside it. Everything felt changed, altered by truths that had been living in the shadows until now. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Julia's mind struggled to make sense of what she had just heard. Until now, she had believed he was just a man bleeding out in the darkness, someone she had stumbled upon by chance. But then Colonel Granger revealed more. The man, Commander Rohr, had refused helicopter extraction, choosing instead to walk out alone through civilian areas to avoid drawing enemy attention and putting his team at further risk. He had tried to disappear quietly, but someone had betrayed him. Someone had leaked his route. They knew exactly where he'd be. "And I just happened to be there," Julia whispered, still trying to process the magnitude of what had unfolded. "No," Granger said firmly. "You weren't just there, you acted. You made a choice when others would have frozen in place or turned and run." His tone didn't carry judgment, it carried awe. From the inside pocket of his uniform, Granger pulled out a bundle wrapped in dark cloth. He unfolded it carefully and held it out to her. Julia's breath caught. It was the same Marine Challenge coin she'd found beside her hospital bed, but this time there was something more. Next to it lay a small, dark pin, nearly unnoticeable unless you were looking for it. Upon closer inspection, it bore the insignia of the 4th Reconnaissance Battalion. "This," Granger said, his voice lower now, "is Commander Rohr's personal coin. It's not something handed out casually. It's reserved only for those who have saved the life of a fellow Marine during combat. He left it for you." Julia reached out with shaking fingers and took the coin in her hand. "Is he alive?" she asked quietly. "He's recovering," the colonel answered. "Quietly. Because of you, he had enough time to disappear and be safely extracted. And thanks to that, we were able to stop 3 coordinated attacks on U.S. embassies within 72 hours. Our intel confirms hundreds of lives were spared." She brought a hand to her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. "I'm no one," she said, her voice cracking. "I was just doing what I've always been taught. Help where you can." That's it. Granger smiled, and something in him shifted, just slightly. The rigid military posture softened, the hard-set lines on his face easing as he looked at her. That's exactly what makes this matter, he said. You didn't act out of rank, out of duty, or because someone barked an order. You acted because it was the right thing to do. That kind of instinct is rare, even among those who wear the uniform. He rose from his seat with slow deliberation, folding the cloth back up, but leaving the coin in Julia's open palm. There won't be any medal, no press conference, no headlines. What happened will remain classified. Julia nodded. She didn't need any of that. She hadn't done it for recognition. She just needed to understand the truth. But at the door, Granger paused. His voice gentled further, the edge of command giving way to something almost personal. Commander Rohr and his team wanted to find a way to thank you quietly, but personally. Tomorrow morning, before your discharge, there'll be a small ceremony. No cameras, just Marines, and a moment we all believe you've earned. He turned once more to look at her, his voice unwavering. You changed the course of events that night. You didn't just save a man. You preserved a mission. You saved lives, and now those lives carry you with them. With that, he placed his cap squarely back on his head, raised a hand in a crisp yet heartfelt salute, not sharp but honest, and stepped out of the room. Julia remained where she was, the silence in the hospital room growing heavy around her. The coin lay cool and solid in her hand. Her father's voice echoed in her mind with unwavering clarity. Right is still right, even if you're the only one doing it. She hadn't merely been in the right place at the right time. She had been the right person. Morning came with a gentle spill of sunlight filtering through the blinds, casting soft shadows across the hospital room. Julia Benton sat on the edge of her bed, one arm still bound in a sling, her shoulder aching in a persistent throb. But that pain wasn't what consumed her. It was the colonel's words from the night before playing over and over in her head like a quiet drumbeat. A small ceremony. Just Marines. A moment you deserve. She had chosen her clothes carefully. A clean button-down shirt and dark jeans. Simple, but it felt dignified. A step above hospital scrubs. Something she could stand tall in. When Dr. Levenson entered to check her vitals, there was a warmth in his demeanor she hadn't seen before. Before you leave, he said, there are some people in the lobby who asked to see you. Julia simply nodded. Her voice wouldn't come. Her throat was tight, heart pounding, not with fear, but with something deeper. Anticipation, wonder, and the quiet, crushing weight of gratitude. The walk down the corridor felt longer than it ever had before. Each footstep seemed to echo in her chest. She stood straighter, but her fingers trembled slightly as she pressed the elevator button. When the doors opened to the hospital's main lobby, Julia stopped short, caught in place by what she saw. 12 Marines stood in precise formation at the heart of the room. They were dressed in full-dress blues, each of them a figure of discipline and strength. Their boots gleamed like black mirrors, their chins held high, eyes locked ahead. Not rigid or indifferent, but steady, proud, and full of quiet reverence. Behind them stood an unexpected audience. Patients in wheelchairs, nurses with clipboards tucked under their arms, staff pausing in the middle of shifts, and even visitors holding cups of coffee. All of them hushed, all of them watching. And every one of them knew they were witnessing something rare, something deeply personal and quietly historic. The custodians had gathered quietly along the walls of the lobby, their usual conversations replaced by complete, reverent silence. The once busy space, typically alive with passing footsteps, laughter, and the soft murmur of everyday life, was now still. Not a single word was spoken. The energy in the room had shifted, something unspoken passing between those present. Commander Ethan Rohr stood firmly at the head of the formation. Though his right arm was wrapped in a thick bandage, his bearing was resolute, dignified. Every inch of him radiated a calm strength. The instant Julia Benton stepped into view, he moved forward, his eyes locked with hers and never wavered. He didn't smile, not fully, but there was something in his expression, an overwhelming combination of honor, deep gratitude, and solemn respect. That said everything his voice didn't. Nurse Julia Benton, he began, his tone unwavering, yet filled with emotion that rested just beneath the surface. 4 nights ago, you made a choice that altered the lives of people you'll never meet. You didn't hesitate in the face of danger. You saw a stranger and treated him like family. You didn't know my name. You didn't know the stakes. But you stepped in without a second thought, because that's simply who you are. Her breath caught, her throat tightening with the weight of his words. The lobby, silent as ever, seemed to hold its breath with her. Commander Rohr turned his head slightly, and at his signal, the 12 Marines who stood in formation behind him snapped to attention. Their boots hit the tile in perfect unison, sharp, disciplined, and deeply resonant. The synchronized salute that followed was flawless. The sound of their heels clicking echoed like a drumbeat through the room, steady, strong, and profound. It was a moment that cameras would fail to truly capture. No photo could do it justice. No medal could measure its meaning. As they held the salute, Commander Rohr stepped closer to her. In his good hand, he held a folded American flag, crisp and ceremonial. His voice softened but carried weight. "This flag flew over our base in Syria," he said. "During the mission, the one your actions helped protect. It's seen places most Americans never will. And it made it back because of you." Julia reached out slowly, her fingers trembling as they met the fabric. She accepted the flag like one might hold a living memory. Before she could fully grasp the moment, Rohr extended something else, smaller this time. A challenge coin, personal, heavy in symbolism. She recognized it instantly. It was the same one she had found left quietly on her bedside table. But now it wasn't a mystery or a token left behind. It was given to her directly, with solemn intention. "Only one is issued to each Marine," he said, voice low, almost intimate. "But this one is yours now, not for courage in combat, but for courage and compassion." Tears welled in her eyes. She could barely summon the breath to respond. When she did, her voice came out as a whisper, fragile and honest. "I just did what anyone should do." Commander Rohr allowed himself the faintest smile. "That's exactly why you're a hero." As he stepped back, the Marines lowered their salutes in flawless unison. A hush lingered for half a heartbeat, then applause broke the stillness. It began gently, respectfully. Then it grew, building into something fuller, more emotional. Nurses clapped, patients clapped. Even the hospital security staff wiped their eyes and nodded with reverence. It wasn't just polite appreciation. It was a deep, collective acknowledgement of something rare. And in the middle of it all stood Julia. In one hand, she held the flag, an emblem of sacrifice and survival. In the other, the coin, a symbol of individual honor passed from soldier to civilian. She stood frozen, suspended somewhere between humility and awe. Her father's voice returned to her mind, quiet but unmistakably firm. "Right is still right, even if you're the only one doing it." For the first time since that terrifying night in the parking lot, Julia let herself believe something she hadn't dared to entertain before, that maybe, just maybe, what she did mattered. That she hadn't merely helped a wounded man. She had made a choice that echoed beyond herself. She had done the right thing. And the ripple of that decision had touched lives she would never even know existed. What defines a hero? Is it the uniform, the insignia, the polished medals on a chest? Or is it the unspoken resolve in a person's heart? The instinct to act in that fragile moment between fear and decision. The instant when no one's watching and there's no reward in sight, only the quiet knowledge that someone needs help. Julia Benton never thought of herself as heroic. She wasn't trained for battle. She didn't carry a weapon. She didn't wear stars or stripes on her shoulders. She was a nurse, an exhausted, overburdened, and underpaid nurse who happened to walk into a parking lot at the wrong time, or perhaps at exactly the right one. That night didn't just change her life. It reminded the rest of us, those who read about it, heard whispers of it, or witnessed its aftermath, that courage is not always loud. It doesn't always scream into sirens or thunder across battlefields. Sometimes it comes in quiet form. A woman with a worn-out shoulder and a heavy tote, making a split-second decision to stop. To kneel beside a bleeding stranger. To act, not for recognition, not for reward, but simply because someone was in need. Her choice wasn't reckless. It was pure instinct. an instinct sharpened by years of quiet strength, by a childhood defined by endurance, and by a father who had taught her that doing what's right doesn't always earn applause, and doesn't need to. That parking lot had been a battlefield of a different kind, one where mercy collided with violence, where compassion held its ground against chaos, and where empathy, pure human empathy, proved mightier than bullets. And Julia never once asked who the man was. She never paused to ask whether he deserved help. She didn't stop to calculate politics, affiliations, or the color of a uniform. She saw a person in danger, and she ran to him. That's what made her extraordinary. And yet, what's perhaps even more moving is that her story isn't entirely one of a kind. Across the country, quiet acts of courage unfold every single day, often unnoticed. Nurses squeeze the hands of patients no one visits. Teachers pay out of their own pockets so children won't go hungry. Good Samaritans pull over in the rain to help push stalled cars off highways. Veterans dedicate their time to shelters. Retirees make grocery runs not for themselves, but for their neighbors. This is the heartbeat of everyday sacrifice. This is what quiet courage looks like. What Julia did that night was incredible. Monumental even. But more than anything, it was a reflection, showing us a glimpse of the people we all could be if we chose to be just a little braver, a little gentler, a little more willing to step forward even when no one's watching. So maybe the real weight of that moment doesn't lie only in what she did, but in the question it leaves in its wake. What would you have done? Would you have stopped? Would you have stepped in? Would you have shielded a stranger with nothing but instinct and the clothes on your back? And if somewhere in your past you've ever moved towards someone in need without expecting anything in return, then maybe, just maybe, you're part of something much larger. Because sometimes the most courageous act we're capable of is simply caring. 1 week after she was discharged, Julia Benton returned home to her father's weathered porch in the quiet countryside of Arkansas. The old wooden swing still groaned with every movement. The pine trees still rustled their secrets into the wind. On the surface, everything was the same. But deep inside, Julia was no longer who she used to be. The sling still cradled her injured arm. Her steps were measured, more cautious. Yet there was something different in how she held herself, something rooted, unwavering. Not pride exactly, but a calm, unshakable sense of purpose. In the living room, a simple wooden box sat on the shelf, hand-built by her father. Inside it, the carefully folded flag and a challenge coin now rested beside old sepia-toned photographs and the rusted dog tags he'd carried through the Gulf War. When Julia stepped through the door, her father didn't say much. He didn't need to. He poured her a cup of coffee, handed her a warm blanket, and took a seat next to her on the porch. They listened to the wind for a long time before he finally spoke. "I always knew you'd do something that mattered." Julia said nothing. She didn't have to. The world outside kept turning. There were no headlines, no spotlight. No one in that hospital lobby would know her name or understand what she had stopped. But that was never the reason she acted. And maybe that's what matters most. Maybe being a hero doesn't mean you have to change the entire world. Maybe it just means choosing, in a single moment, to show up, to not look away. So now, if you're watching this, ask yourself, have you ever had a moment like Julia's? Maybe it wasn't a crisis. Maybe it wasn't life or death. But maybe you stood up when it would have been easier to sit down. Maybe you offered help when no one else did. Maybe you spoke out when silence would have been safer. If you have, we want to hear your story. Leave it in the comments. Let others see that quiet strength, the compassion that still pulses through this world. Because those stories, your stories, matter. And if what Julia did lit a fire inside you, share this story. Subscribe for more like it. Stories that remind us who we really are at our best. And always remember, you don't need a uniform to serve. You just need to be the right person in the right moment who chooses to care.